The solar war was over. Now the war for Terra began. On the 13th day of Secundus, Horus fired his first shell at the Imperial palace. It was aimed directly at the Sanctum Imperialis, the private domain of the Emperor. The message was unmistakable. I have crossed your defenses. I have reached your world, and I am coming for you. The shell screamed through Terra's atmosphere above the Himalaysian mountains. Defense lasers found it before it could strike. It vanished in a web of light. But destruction had never been its true purpose. The shot was a challenge, a declaration between brothers. Rogal Dorn watched it fall from the Bab bastion. Sanguinius stood beside him. Jaghatai Khan stood on his other side. 3 loyal Primarchs beneath the greatest invasion fleet humanity had ever seen. Thousands of warships crowded Terra's orbit. Their lights buried the stars. Their shields painted diseased colors across the atmosphere. Every palace tower rang its bells. Sirens screamed. Defense guns fired without pause. The loyalist batteries could barely miss. There were too many targets. One traitor vessel broke apart above them, scattering debris toward the world below. For a moment, Horus answered with only that single shell. The Khan understood why. It was the symbolic spear cast before battle, a promise that the Warmaster would take the palace. Sanguinius called it arrogance. The Khan called it the weakness that would destroy Horus. Then Sanguinius pointed toward the sky. The enemy fleet opened fire, all of it at once. Space became white. 1 billion weapons hurled shells, plasma, and energy toward Terra. The palace guns answered. Munitions burned through the atmosphere in both directions. The last orbital plates disappeared behind explosions. Ancient void shields spread over the Imperial palace and turned the sky into flame. Beyond their protection, Terra erupted. Nuclear fire climbed from every horizon. Mountains trembled. Cities vanished. The throne world shook beneath the first bombardment. Dorn looked into the inferno. Somewhere beyond the system, Robute Gilliman was coming. But until he arrived, Terra had one task: survive. We will not fall, Dorn said. We will stand. Thousands of kilometers away, the war already looked different. In the Altai wastes, civilians had been gathered for the final conscription. Miners, laborers, scribes, farmers, anyone capable of holding a weapon. Among them moved 2 people who did not belong: Mismadra and Ashel, agents of the Alpha Legion. They discarded their specialist equipment and dressed as workers. Their orders were simple: enter the Imperial palace, create havoc. They slipped into the frightened crowd as the bombardment lit the mountains. No one noticed them. The conscripts were packed into freight containers and transported toward the palace. For 16 hours they stood pressed together in darkness. There was no room to sit, no room to sleep, no room even for the dead to fall. One of them was named Katsuhiro. He was not a warrior. He had never dreamed of becoming one. When the container opened at Eternity Terminus, he was dragged into noise, light, and terror. Marshals shouted. Shock malls cracked. Thousands poured from the trains. Some stumbled and were trampled before reaching the battlefield. A mass-produced laser gun was forced into Katsuhiro's hands. A kit bag was hung around his neck. That was his recruitment. That was his training. The Imperial Palace had become a machine consuming human lives. Every corridor carried troops. Every hall had become a barracks, armory, or hospital. Katsuhiro did not know where he was going. He did not know his officers. He did not know how the battle would be fought. He knew only that the crowd was carrying him deeper into the palace, toward the walls, toward the guns, toward the armies of Horus. Above him stood demigods who had spent years planning the defense. Around him marched millions given a weapon only minutes earlier. And hidden among them were agents waiting to destroy Terra from within. The first shells had not broken the palace shields, but the siege had already entered the walls. The palace did not welcome Katsuhiro. It processed him. At Eternity Terminus, the population of Terra was divided by colored tokens. Friends were separated. Families disappeared into different crowds. Officials pointed at strangers and decided which army would own them. Katsuhiro received a green marker. 100 frightened people gathered around him. One of them was Doromek, small, filthy, strong, and unlike almost everyone else, calm. He helped Katsuhiro open his kit and showed him which tablets would keep him conscious. Katsuhiro tried to explain that he was not a soldier. He was an enumerator from a nutrient complex. A woman nearby gave him the truth. He had been an enumerator. Now he was a soldier. No oath, no ceremony, no choice. The green group was forced onto another train. Through the windows, Katsuhiro saw the Imperial Palace for the first time. Not the shining city shown in propaganda. A fortress. Ancient monuments stood between gun emplacements. Titans guarded buildings once devoted to government and art. Every road carried weapons. Every open space held another army. Then the train entered the darkness beneath the palace. Katsuhiro had no idea where it was taking him. The greatest fortress in human history was preparing for war with whatever bodies it could find. Deep inside the Bab Bastion, Rogal Dorn gathered those who understood the conflict. Sanguinius, Jaghatai Kham, Constantine Valdor, and Malkador the Sigillite. Luna had fallen. Every orbital fort close to Terra had been destroyed or captured. The Warmaster controlled the void above the throne world. The Loyalists were cut off. Horus possessed enough firepower to erase Terra. He could break the planet with asteroids, reduce the palace to molten stone without landing a single warrior. But he did not. That was the first weakness Dorn found in the enemy plan. Horus did not want Terra destroyed. Terra was only the battlefield. The Emperor was the target. The Warmaster had spent the heresy racing toward this confrontation. He had abandoned stable conquests, left loyalist armies alive behind him, allowed Guilliman time to gather the Eastern Imperium. Every decision had served one purpose: reach the Emperor, face him, kill him. Horus was no longer fighting only for military victory. He needed a symbolic murder that would echo through the warp. Dorn understood walls, guns, and armies. He did not understand sorcery. The rituals of the traitors had repeatedly broken his calculations. Malkador told him this war existed on two fronts, one of flesh and steel, another of spirit and myth. Dorn could not fight both. His role was to command the material war, hold the walls, spend lives carefully, force Horus to bleed for every kilometer. The Loyalists did not need to defeat the Warmaster's host. They needed to delay it. Robute Guilliman was coming. Survivors of the Salamanders and Raven Guard were gathering with the Ultramarines. More forces joined the Eastern Fleet at every system. If Guilliman reached Terra with an army close to the strength of Horus, the traitors would be trapped between the palace and the largest Loyalist force in the galaxy. That was why Horus had to win quickly, and why Dorn had sent the phalanx away. The fortress could not defeat the traitor armada alone. If it remained in orbit, it would be destroyed. Instead, Su Cassin would gather the surviving Loyalist fleets beyond Terra. When Guilliman arrived, the phalanx would clear his path through the outer system. It would also serve one final purpose. If Terra fell, it might carry the Emperor away. Sanguinius doubted escape would be possible. Dorn refused to surrender the option. The Emperor mattered more than the world beneath them. Outside, the bombardment continued. Every explosion shook dust from ancient ceilings. Every minute brought Horus closer. The Khan wanted open war. Sanguinius carried visions of his death. Dorn carried the weight of every life inside the palace. None knew when Guilliman would arrive. Weeks, months, perhaps never. So Dorn reduced the greatest war in human history to a single command: endure. Every wall was time. Every gun was time. Every soldier was time. And somewhere beneath them, Katsuhiro's train carried another load of that time toward the front. The Loyalists were not only waiting for Guilliman, they were counting everyone who had failed to reach Terra. Leman Russ was missing after his attack on Horus. Korax was lost somewhere beyond the front. The Lion was destroying traitor homeworlds instead of coming to the palace. Ferrus Manus was dead, and Vulcan was believed dead. Against Dorn, Sanguinius, and the Khan stood Horus, Perturabo, Angron, Fulgrim, and Magnus. Mortarion and Lorgar might still come. The balance could become 6 against 3, possibly worse. Horus was always the most charismatic of us, the Khan said. Then Malkador revealed another secret. Vulcan lived. Sanguinius had seen his corpse on Macragge, but Vulcan was a perpetual. Death could take him. It could not keep him. The Salamanders had carried his body back to Nocturne, where he returned to life. And he had already reached Terra. For months, Vulcan had remained hidden beneath the Imperial palace. He was not commanding armies. He was guarding a door. The Emperor had left the Great Crusade to build a path into the webway, a network beyond normal space, a road that could free humanity from dependence on warp travel. If the project succeeded, the Imperium would no longer need navigators, astropaths, or the dangerous currents where the gods of chaos waited. The Emperor had been close to success. Then Magnus tried to warn him about Horus. His psychic message shattered the wards protecting the Imperial webway. Demons flooded through the breach. The Custodes and the Sisters of Silence fought beneath the palace for years. Thousands died in a war most of the Imperium never knew existed. The Webway project collapsed, but the gate remained. and the golden throne became the only barrier holding it shut. The emperor was not sitting upon his throne as a symbol of command. He was trapped there. If he rose, the gate would open. The warp would pour directly into Terra. The Imperial palace would drown beneath an endless tide of demons. Even the emperor could not hold that door forever. So Vulcan waited before it, alone. If the emperor failed, Vulcan would become the final defender between humanity and the warp. Dorn stared at Malcador. The scale of the deception stunned even him. His father was already fighting a siege, not against Horus's fleet, against the infinite pressure of the immaterium. The walls above protected the emperor. The emperor protected the walls below. Both wars had to be won. Sanguinius asked what one Primarch could do against the full power of chaos. Malcador gave him the only answer he had. They had better win before they found out. There were no further reserves. Malcador's knights-errant were gone on another mission. The Custodes had been devastated in the webway. Russ and Corax could not be reached. The Lion followed his own war. Guilliman remained far away. The plan was no longer hidden inside another plan. The plan was Dorn, Sanguinius, the Calm. 3 Primarchs holding walls of stone while the Emperor held walls of spirit. They would use every weapon, every legionary, every mortal soldier, every hour purchased with blood. Dorn turned the council toward the practical work of survival. But before the strategy could be completed, alarms rang inside the Grand Borealis Strategium. Thoria Amund watched the instruments used to detect disturbances in the warp. One signal became many. A new fleet was entering the system. The Khan had wondered if Mortarion might never come. Sanguinius had hoped his hatred of sorcery might keep him from the alliance he had chosen. Dorn had rejected the thought. Mortarion's hatred of the Emperor was too deep. Now the instruments confirmed it. The 14th Legion had arrived. The Death Guard were coming to Terra. And they were no longer the Legion the Loyalists remembered. The ships emerging from the warp carried plague. Their warriors carried decay. Their Primarch carried the blessing of a god he had once despised. One of the missing brothers had answered the question himself. Mortarion had come. And death was coming with him. Mortarion was coming. But aboard the vengeful spirit, Abaddon found something that frightened him more than the Death Guard. Horus was changing. The Warmaster sat unconscious inside a temple that should not have existed. Its doors opened into a space beyond the physical hull. The air froze and burned at the same time. Shadows whispered promises. The architecture shifted according to laws no human mind could understand. Zardu Lyak called it a throne room. Abaddon called it a prison. He looked upon his father and saw a bloated shadow of the Primarch he had followed. Horus's face was swollen with power. His teeth had sharpened. Energy in 4 colors moved around his body. Every time Horus fell, the powers of chaos returned him. And every time he returned, something of the old Horus was missing. Abaddon hated the weakness. He hated Lyak. He hated the gods that claimed to serve his father while feeding upon him. The sons of Horus had rebelled against one tyrant, Abaddon had not crossed the galaxy to kneel before 4 more. Lyack insisted that Horus was no slave. He was the chosen champion of the Pantheon. Abaddon saw chains. Horus believed he commanded the warp. Abaddon was beginning to wonder if the warp commanded him. While his body remained upon the throne, Horus's spirit walked into the past. He returned to the first day he had come to Terra. The Imperial palace was still unfinished. The people of old Earth filled its roads and shouted his name. Gold fell from the towers. Banners moved in the cold wind. At the end of a long processional road waited the Emperor. Horus remembered the awe he had felt, the love, the certainty that he and his father would build a new future for humanity. But 4 companions walked beside him. They wore the shapes of warriors from Thonia. Horus could not remember their names, because they had never been there. One was violence, one was change, one was decay, one was excess. The 4 gods of chaos had entered his memory with him. They whispered new meaning into everything he saw. The palace became arrogance. Unity became slavery. The Emperor's dream became another tyrant's lie. Past and present overlapped. The younger Horus approached the golden throne to swear loyalty. The Warmaster watched himself kneel in disgust. Then the Emperor looked directly at the spirit invading his memory. Father and son met across time. Horus told him he had returned stronger. The Emperor showed him the truth. A body imprisoned on the golden throne. Vulcan waiting with his hammer before the webway gate. And beyond them, a final image. A corpse trapped inside a machine that had grown monstrous around it. Horus laughed. He drew upon the strength of the 4 gods behind him. The Emperor's light forced him back. The power Horus borrowed was consuming him from within. It was not enough. Not yet. An hour later, Horus awoke aboard the vengeful spirit. He could barely lift his head. Abaddon moved to help him. Lyack ordered him not to touch the Warmaster. Frost covered Horus's armor. His body sagged. For one moment, Abaddon saw no conqueror, only a wounded father pretending he was still in control. Then Horus stood. Power poured from him. It pressed upon Abaddon's mind with a single command. Kneel. Abaddon refused. He had come to demand action. Luna had fallen. The Selenar gene temples had been captured. Terra's orbital resistance had been destroyed. The bombardment had begun. Every army was waiting. And Horus was sitting inside a temple, chasing the Emperor through dreams. Abaddon warned him that delay gave Dorn strength. Guilliman was still coming. Every hour mattered. Then he delivered the final news. Mortarion and the entire Death Guard fleet had broken from the warp. The traitor host was complete. Horus stared at his first captain. The pressure demanding obedience became almost unbearable. Abaddon still would not kneel. He had followed Horus the warrior, Horus the liberator, Horus the father of his legion. He would not bow to the creature the gods were building from him. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Horus descended from his throne. "Mortarion is late," he said. The Warmaster was finally ready to begin the invasion. But Abaddon had seen the truth hidden behind his power. The closer Horus came to defeating the Emperor, the less of Horus remained. Katsuhiro's train carried him to the inner wall of the Imperial palace. Calling it a wall was almost meaningless. It was a mountain built in a line. Its upper surface was broad enough for highways. Gun towers rose along it for dozens of kilometers. Macro cannons fired into orbit every minute. Beyond the main fortification waited 2 more lines of walls, trenches, bunkers, and killing fields. This was where Katsuhiro's group was sent, not behind the walls, in front of them. 300 conscripts were delivered to a single exhausted officer, Adina Hav Jinan. The documents in his hands declared him an acting captain. They did not provide any other officers. He told the frightened civilians the full extent of their military training. Obey him or be shot. They had been assigned to the Kushtun Naganda, one of the old 100 regiments, a name that had once carried honor across Terra. Now it was being rebuilt from strangers who could not march. Their position was near Bastion 16, the outermost defensive line. Katsuhiro felt relief when Jinan said the enemy would not attack that day. Runakan, a thin man with a talent for cruelty, corrected him. Reserves were not kept safe. They performed the labor. Then they died when the line broke. The conscripts marched through a storm. Black snow covered their uniforms. It was ash from the rest of Terra. The palace shields could stop shells. They could not stop the poisoned remains of cities falling slowly from the sky. Katsuhiro asked Dorimek why they had been placed so far forward. Dorimek gave him the answer. They were not supposed to be protected. They were the protection. An aircraft passed overhead. The conscripts threw themselves into the mud. No bombs fell, only paper. Katsuhiro picked up a leaflet. It carried the image of a Primarch and the number 13. Lord Guilliman is coming. Stand firm and survive. The message was meant to create hope. Dorimek laughed. If Guilliman reached Terra, most of them would already be dead. Katsuhiro asked what the conscripts were expected to accomplish. Soak up bullets, force the enemy to spend ammunition, give the defenders behind the walls more time. Captain Jinan overheard Dorimek. He discovered that the filthy little man had served 15 years with the Atlantean Rangers, a sniper, a soldier who had avoided every earlier draft. Jinan promoted him immediately, acting lieutenant. Dorimek responded by making Katsuhiro his first sergeant. Neither appointment required training, only survival. They reached Bastion 16 through the snow. A massive drum-shaped tower stood behind the outer rampart. Its guns tracked the empty battlefield. The conscripts received food and a few hours of sleep. On the 16th of Secundus, the alarms began. Katsuhiro ran outside. The sky had become an ocean of fire held back by overlapping void shields. Then one shield failed. A dark opening appeared above a nearby tower. The traitor fleet reacted immediately. Shells fell through the gap. 5 beams struck from different angles. Rockcrete melted. Metal poured down the tower's sides. The defense laser fired one final time. Then mass rounds smashed into its turret. The top of the tower tore free. Conscripts ran toward it, desperate to do something. Katsuhiro stayed where he was. There was nothing a man with a laser gun could do against destruction falling from orbit. More beams cut into the ammunition stores. The explosion erased everything. The blast threw Katsuhiro across the snow. Debris crushed soldiers around him. When he opened his eyes, the tower was gone. The void shield returned over the ruin. The bombardment moved to the next target. Doromek found Katsuhiro in the wreckage. The first great gun had fallen. The traitors would repeat the process: break a shield, destroy a tower, clear the sky above the palace, then land troops beneath the remaining fire. The invasion would begin, one opening at a time. The enemy was clearing a landing zone, directly in front of Bastion 16. Horus's armies were coming down, and they were coming straight at Katsuhiro. 8 days passed beneath the bombardment. On the 24th of Secundus, Sanguinius flew above the Imperial palace. Dorn had ordered him to remain protected. The angel ignored him. Flight was the last freedom left to Sanguinius. His wings carried him beneath a ceiling of fire while defense lasers and shells crossed around him. He knew where every shot would pass. His foresight was growing stronger, because his death was coming closer. Sanguinius had seen the moment Horus would kill him. That fixed point waited in his future like a nail driven through time. The nearer he came to it, the more clearly he saw everything around it. So the angel moved through the gunfire untouched. Below him stretched the Imperial palace. Thousands of kilometers of walls, mountain-sized gates, spaceports large enough to hold fleets, ancient buildings covered in armor and sandbags. Anything that could mount a gun had been preserved. Everything else made room for more weapons. The Emperor's dream had become Dorn's fortress. Then Sanguinius saw another Terra, the world that would exist thousands of years later. The palace had spread beyond its walls. Endless structures buried the mountains. The restored oceans and forests were gone. Everything was gray, crowded, oppressive. A planet consumed by the empire it ruled. The vision struck him so hard that he fell. For several seconds, the great angel dropped through the burning sky. Then his wings opened. The present returned. But Sanguinius understood what he had seen. Even if the Loyalists won, the Emperor's dream would not survive unchanged. The future was already being born beneath Horus's guns. Sanguinius landed at the Helios Gate. Raldoron waited with Captain Thane of the Imperial Fists. Thane's warriors were repairing the breach left by the fallen Dawn Tower. The tower could not be replaced. The wall could still be closed. Then Sanguinius looked beyond the fortifications. 3 defensive lines crossed the plain. The best Imperial army regiments stood upon the main wall. The Space Marines remained behind its protection. Outside waited the conscripts, Katsuhiro, Doromek, Jinan, and millions like them. They had been placed there because they were expendable. When Horus landed his first armies, those civilians would absorb the attack, reveal enemy positions, slow the advance, spend ammunition, then die. Dorn's decision was merciless. Sanguinius also knew it was correct. Veterans and Space Marines could not be wasted on the opening assault. They would be needed when the true battle reached the walls. The angel hated the calculation. He accepted it anyway. Raldoron saw tears on his Primarch's face. Sanguinius had not realized he was crying. He told his son why. He wept for the price of victory. Then he stopped the tears through force of will. The conscripts below would never know that a Primarch mourned them. It would not change their fate. Sanguinius walked through the firing galleries. Many Blood Angels he passed were young. Terran recruits created rapidly through Selenar gene craft. They had never seen Baal. Even the legions were rebuilding from whatever remained. At the sealed passage where the Dawn Tower had stood, Dorn contacted him. He was irritated that Sanguinius had come so close to the outer defenses. The angel reminded him that they could not hide until Horus dragged them out. Dorn had another reason for calling. Zagreus Cain wanted an urgent meeting. Cain was the Loyalist Fabricator General, the master of the surviving Mechanicum forces on Terra. He refused to explain through remote communication. Dorn could not leave the command center. The Khan would offend Cain, so Sanguinius would go in Dorn's place. The angel welcomed the distraction. There was nothing else to do but wait. Dorn told him that this was the nature of sieges. Long hours of boredom, then moments of terror. Attack, repulse, repair, repeat, until one side could no longer continue. Sanguinius looked once more at the wall built over the ruin of the Dawn Tower. The first gun had fallen. The palace was already closing the wound. But the Fabricator General had seen something important enough to demand a Primarch's attention. Something he would not trust to the Vox. Horus was preparing the first assault from above, and the war within Terra's machines was about to become just as important. While Terra waited, Horus gathered his generals. Not in one room. That had become too dangerous. Angron could barely control himself. Fulgrim delighted in provoking him. Mortarion refused every communication. Perturabo remained in the outer system, fortifying the routes Guilliman would use. The greatest host humanity had ever assembled was tearing itself apart. Abaddon understood the problem. Chaos had given them power. It had destroyed their discipline. Horus called the council through hololithic projections. Angron appeared first, red-skinned, winged, horned, the butcher's nails hanging around a face trapped in eternal rage. Fulgrim followed, a four-armed serpent wearing the beauty of a fallen angel. Perturabo appeared as he had always been, armored, bitter, still refusing worship. Magnus projected his presence through sorcery. His shape changed beneath the image he forced others to see. Each Primarch demanded the same thing: attack. Angron wanted to lead the first charge. Fulgrim wanted to release his sons across Terra. Perturabo explained why neither would survive the descent. The palace remained protected by three obstacles: its guns, its void shields, and the Emperor. The guns could destroy landing craft before they reached the ground. The overlapping Aegis could replace a failed shield before the enemy exploited it. And the Emperor's power prevented demons from manifesting upon Terra. That included the transformed Primarchs. If Angron, Fulgrim, or Magnus tried to land, his presence could tear their souls from their bodies. Angron called it cowardice. Perturabo called it mathematics. He had spent the bombardment testing every layer of the palace Aegis. Different velocities, different masses, different attack patterns. The destroyed Dawn Tower had been one of those tests. Its shield failure was accidental. but it gave Perturabo the information he needed. The Aegis could not be broken from orbit. It could be weakened. The traitor fleet would concentrate fire on 8 points around the palace. Under that pressure, slower aircraft might force through the outer layers. Almost half would be destroyed. Horus accepted the loss. The survivors would target defense towers, shield generators, and anti-air batteries. While Dorn's guns fought them, landing craft would descend beyond the walls. But the legions would not lead them. Not yet. Horus would send mortals, traitor soldiers, cultists, mutants, beastmen. The forgotten armies that outnumbered the legions hundreds of times over. They would attack every city and burn every settlement. Their purpose was not to defeat the palace. Their purpose was to die. Magnus projected a symbol over Terra. 8 points surrounding the Imperial palace. An occult pattern drawn across a world. Every drop of blood spilled inside it would weaken the Emperor's hold on reality. Every death would feed the warp. Millions of sacrifices would transform Terra into ground where demons could walk. Only then could the transformed Primarchs descend. Only then could the Neverborn join the siege. The mortals were ammunition. The same calculation was being made on both sides. Dorn had placed conscripts outside his walls to spend bullets and purchase time. Horus would throw his mortal armies against them to spill enough blood to poison the world. Neither side expected the first lines to survive. Perturabo would open the sky. The mortal armies would water Terra with blood. The Emperor's barrier would weaken. Then Angron and Fulgrim would be released. Mortarion would lead the true assault when he arrived. Horus gave the command. Let the lost and the damned tire the palace guns. Let them burn the Emperor's world while he watched. Let their corpses become the road the legions would follow. Across the traitor fleet, transports began loading. Human soldiers entered beside things that had once been human. Pilots were told to expect losses approaching half their number. None could refuse. Above Terra, the bombardment changed. 8 regions of the palace came under concentrated fire. The pattern had begun. At Bastion 16, Katsuhiro looked into an empty sky. He believed the enemy was coming to kill him. The truth was worse. They were coming to die with him.
Sanguinius descended beneath the palace to meet Zagreus Cain. The loyalist fabricator general did not make the journey easy. 10,000 Scutari stood outside his hidden fortress in perfect silence. They opened a path only after forcing the Primarch to wait. It was a political gesture, a reminder that the Mechanicum was an ally, not a servant. Sanguinius entered alone. A platform carried him deep into the mountains. Titan-sized doors sealed above him. 20 minutes later, he reached a cavern large enough to contain an army of god machines. Warlord Titans stood within carved alcoves. Tech priests moved across their armor. Repair platforms surrounded wounded engines. Incense mixed with oil and hot metal. It looked like overwhelming power. It was only 1/10 of the Titan strength remaining on Terra. Most had been lost in the Webway, on Mars, or at Beta Garman. The surviving Mechanicum had not forgotten. Many blamed Sanguinius for ordering the engine war that destroyed hundreds of Titans. Others believed Mars had surrendered too much authority to Terra.
They hated Kelbor Hell for joining Horus. But that did not mean they loved the Imperium. Cain admitted the truth. The alliance between Terra and Mars might survive the siege. It might not survive victory. If the Mechanicum's grievances were ignored after Horus fell, one civil war could lead directly into another. Sanguinius had little patience left for politics. Cain had little patience left for war. But politics had not been the true reason for the meeting. Cain led the angel to a damaged warlord titan, Luxor in Victoria, the surviving command engine of Legio Salaria. Its former great mother had died at Beta Garman. Her daughter, Esha Ani Mohana Vai, now commanded the shattered Legio. She had only recently awakened from a therapeutic coma, and she remembered something from the battle. Something no loyalist commander knew. On the slopes near the Carthagia Telepathica, Esha Ani had seen Horus. The Warmaster stood above the battlefield as a conqueror. Then he collapsed. No weapon struck him. A wound opened in his side. His officers panicked. They teleported him away. Sanguinius understood what she had witnessed. Leman Russ had reached Horus. The spear of Russ had wounded the Warmaster before the Space Wolves withdrew, and that wound had nearly killed him. Horus was not invulnerable. The power of chaos had not made him untouchable. Sanguinius immediately contacted Dorn. The Praetorian considered the evidence. Horus's collapse explained why the Loyalists had escaped Beta Garman more easily than expected. It explained his periods of weakness, perhaps even his delay above Terra. But Dorn refused to build a strategy upon hope. Horus had reached the throne world. Whatever the wound had done, the Warmaster remained powerful enough to command the siege. Sanguinius suggested keeping the information secret. A story about Horus surviving a mortal wound could help the enemy more than the defenders. Rumor would turn recovery into immortality. It would make Horus appear blessed beyond death. Dorn agreed. The knowledge that the Warmaster could bleed would remain hidden. As Sanguinius emerged from Cain's fortress, the sky had changed. The bombardment was no longer spread evenly across the palace. The center had become almost clear. Fire now circled the outer walls. Perturabo's 8 attack points. The traitor fleet had finished testing the Aegis. Now it was executing the plan. Dorn confirmed that ships throughout the blockade were moving. Attack craft were forming into waves. Transports were leaving their carriers. Millions of troops were preparing for descent. The long bombardment had never been the invasion. It had only been the tool that opened the way. Sanguinius looked toward the burning horizon. Cain's Titans were not yet walking. The Space Marines remained behind the walls. Outside, the conscript armies waited beneath the targeted sections of sky. The information about Horus changed nothing. The Warmaster could bleed. So could everyone standing between him and the Emperor. Dorn gave the warning. The enemy was attempting its first landing.
The first soldiers sent toward Terra were not Space Marines. They were the people the Imperium had forgotten. Inside a herd ship waited Asmidi. He had been born human. The Imperium had given him another name, Beastman. His horns and animal features marked him as a mutant, something tolerated only in the darkest places of human worlds. Asmiti had tried to follow Imperial law, tried to prove there was still a man inside his altered body. It never mattered. Pure-blooded humans saw a monster. They drove his kind into ruins, mines, and the lowest levels of hives. Now, a dark apostle spoke through the herdship. He took every humiliation Asmiti had suffered and turned it into a weapon. The Emperor created monsters and called them heroes, Space Marines, Primarchs. But those born different were branded unclean. The Apostle told the Beastmen that Chaos did not despise them. Chaos considered them holy, children of change, living proof that humanity had more than one form. The hold filled with rage. Hooves struck the deck. Horns crashed together. The herd chanted the word once used to shame them. Beasts, beasts, beasts. Asmiti resisted. He wanted to remain human. But memory became anger. Anger became freedom. By the time the herdship was released toward Terra, the beastmen were fighting among themselves. On another vessel waited Hannes Ofar, a soldier of the Thernians. His regiment had followed Horus for years. Most of its men were dead. Its transports were gone. Its survivors lived inside a repurposed fleet tender. Hannes carved the 8-pointed star into his lasgun, not because he believed, because he did not want the believers to notice that he did not. His comrade Fendo had accepted the new faith completely. The gods were real. The Emperor had lied. Worship could bring power. Hannes saw no divine favor in their starving regiment. He did not fight for the Pantheon. He fought for Horus. Years earlier, the Warmaster had walked among the Thernians. He had spoken to ordinary soldiers, shared their fires, remembered their victories. Hannes had stood close enough to touch him. That moment bent the rest of his life around it. Wherever Horus went, Hannes would follow. Then the deployment alarm sounded. The Thernians had been chosen to secure the beachhead. Hannes could not understand how. Their ship had no landing craft. The answer came when the entire vessel changed direction. The fleet tender began descending. It had never been built to enter an atmosphere. The Thernians were being thrown at a planet inside whatever hull remained available. Across the fleet, the same order was carried out. Herd ships, freighters, cargo vessels, troop carriers, ancient hulks. Anything capable of moving toward Terra joined the descent. 100,000 craft fell from orbit. Many had never been intended to touch a world. Their hulls burned in the atmosphere. Below, every city on Terra was under attack. Hives burned. Young seas boiled. New forests turned to ash. Horus punished humanity to wound his father. Then Dorn gave the order to fire. The guns of Terra opened upon the formation. Small craft vanished instantly. Larger transports broke apart and continued falling as wreckage. Thousands died before seeing the ground. Their souls flooded into the warp, exactly as Horus intended. Still, the landing craft came. The fleet was so vast that every ship destroyed meant almost nothing. And when the defenders had more targets than they could count, the second wave launched. Fighters, bombers, attack craft moving far faster than the transports. They raced between the falling ships while Imperial gunners struggled to choose.
The transports carried sacrifices. The aircraft carried the true mission. Destroy the guns. Break the shield projectors. Open the sky. At Bastion 16, the horizon darkened beneath the descending fleet. Katsuhiro had spent days waiting for the enemy. Now the enemy covered the heavens. Some came for revenge. Some came for faith. Some came because they still loved Horus. None knew they had been chosen to die. And Terra's defenders had been given the same role.
The transports were only half of Horus's attack. The fighters came next. At the Eternity Wall spaceport, Squadron Mistress Aisha Devainpour had spent almost 2 weeks waiting. Her unit was the 198th Squadron, the Bright Hawks. 16 Panthera-class fighters built with some of the finest technology in the Imperium. They existed to defend the skies above the Imperial Palace. Since the bombardment began, they had done nothing. Aisha understood that waiting was part of a soldier's duty. A warrior had to be ready to die. A pilot also had to be patient enough not to lose herself before death arrived. But the waiting was breaking them. Every day brought the same checks: weapons, fuel, engines, flight suits. Then hours listening to shells explode against the Aegis. Aisha was not afraid of dying. She was afraid of dying without purpose. A useless death, she wrote in her diary, was the worst death of all. Outside her quarters, fire covered the sky. The explosions were close enough to illuminate the hangar through its launch opening. The Chronos said it was night. Terra had not experienced true darkness since Horus arrived. Aisha watched the Bright Hawks standing beneath their squadron banner. Their Pantheras were fast enough to reach the void within minutes. Their weapons could destroy aircraft and starships. Their pilots were among the finest in the Segmentum Solar. And they remained trapped on the ground. Then the klaxons sounded. Every squadron was ordered to its launch bays. Golden aircraft belonging to the Custodes passed the hangar. That confirmed it. This was not another drill. The invasion had begun. Pilots ran to their fighters. Servitors removed protective covers. Ground crews loaded missiles. Engines ignited. Aisha climbed into Blue Zephyr. She checked her systems, then pressed 2 fingers against the image of her husband fixed inside the cockpit. She hadn't seen him for 5 years. She still loved him. The first Pantheras reached the launch rails. Magnetic catapults threw them from the side of the spaceport. 1 pair, then another. Aisha waited for the signal. Red, 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 green. Blue Zephyr was hurled into the sky. Acceleration crushed Aisha into her seat. The palace became a blur beneath her. Then her fighter passed through the void shields and entered hell. Weapons powerful enough to destroy cities crossed the air in every direction. Lance beams descended from orbit. Defense lasers climbed from the palace. Plasma burst against the Aegis. Mass rounds detonated with enough force to shake mountains. The Bright Hawks tried to form around their squadron mistress. A lance strike passed through them. 1 fighter disappeared. No warning, no wreckage. One moment a pilot had been flying beside them. The next, the sky was empty. Communications failed beneath the interference. Aisha called for her second-in-command. No answer. She climbed through smoke, ash, and electrical storms while her instruments flickered. Then Blue Zephyr emerged over the central palace. For a few seconds, the air around her cleared. Thousands of Loyalist aircraft filled the sky. Imperial Army fighters, Legion gunships in red, white, and yellow, atmospheric interceptors,
void-capable attack craft, rare golden vessels of the Custodes. Every surviving air formation on Terra had launched. The Brighthawks regrouped. High Command transmitted the order: prepare for engagement. Aisha turned Blue Zephyr upward, her auger screen activated. Contacts appeared, then more, then thousands more. The display became a solid wall of warning symbols. The Loyalists had expected an air battle. What approached them was an artificial sky. Fighters flew ahead of bombers. Attack craft surrounded the descending transports. Behind them fell freighters and herd ships large enough to crush cities. The defenders didn't need to search for targets. There was nowhere they could fire without finding one. But every Loyalist aircraft destroyed could not be replaced. Horus could lose thousands and continue. Terra could not. Aisha looked through the canopy. The enemy air fleet covered everything above her. There was no open path to orbit, no horizon, no stars. Only machines descending through fire. For 14 days, Aisha had feared a useless death. Now the entire sky had come to give her one that mattered.
Loman's promise should have broken apart before reaching the ground. Instead, it survived long enough to crash. The fleet tender shook through the atmosphere. Its engines screamed. Metal tore from the hull. Imperial fire punched through the decks and cut men apart in blue light. Hannes Ophar fought through smoke, blood, and bodies. For the first time, he breathed the air of humanity's homeworld. It smelled of burning metal. When the vessel struck the Katabatic plains, the engines died. Silence lasted only a moment. Then the damaged loading doors opened. Hannes saw Terra. The Imperial palace filled the horizon. Ships descended in flames. Minefields erased entire regiments. Loyalist aircraft strafed survivors. A plasma blast consumed 100 men. Thousands died every second. Then Hannes found Fendo, dead. The gods he trusted had not protected him. Officers forced the surviving Thernians into formation. Their colonel stood at the front. He had led them when Horus awarded the regiment its colors. Now he gave one final order: for the Warmaster. The Thernians charged from the wreck. This was the glory they had crossed the galaxy to find. A short run beneath the guns of Terra. The beastmen landed nearby. Gas flooded their transport before impact. Combat stimulants destroyed what remained of Osmades' reason. The ramps blew free, killing those standing too close. The survivors did not notice. They poured from the vessel. Osmades ran faster than the humans and mutants around him. His altered legs carried him across the ground in enormous strides. The palace aegis burned ahead. He entered it slowly enough to survive. The energy tried to tear him apart. Then he emerged inside the shield. 300 meters away waited the third defensive line. 1,000 conscripts opened fire. Beastmen fell. Osmades kept running. A lasbolt burned through his shoulder. He barely felt it. He reached the rampart and leapt. His hooves carried him over the wall and onto a terrified defender. One blow crushed the man's skull. Osmades drove his horns into another soldier. More beastmen landed beside him. They had no formation, no discipline. Only strength, stimulants, and a lifetime of hatred. The conscripts panicked. Their volleys became scattered shots. Bayonets broke against bodies that fought through mortal wounds. The third line collapsed. Traitor army units occupied the captured positions. They began firing toward the second line.
Loyalist officers ordered the second line to shoot through their own retreating soldiers. The beastmen were caught between both sides. So were the defenders trying to escape. Osmadi grabbed a wounded man as a shield, then charged toward the next company. Murder had replaced everything. At the Helios Gate, Raldoron watched the breach spread. Sector 16, close to Katsuhiro's position. Captain Thane wanted to send the Imperial fists forward. Raldoron refused. The Space Marines would remain upon the wall. The mortals outside had been placed there for this purpose. They would delay the enemy, kill as many as possible, and die before the legions entered the battle. Thane hated the order. Space Marines had been created to protect humanity. Now they watched while ordinary people sold their lives alone. Raldoron reminded him that the ground assault was only part of the plan. Above them, attack craft searched for weaknesses in the Aegis. Perturabo was watching every shield response. If the legions moved early, Horus would learn their positions. So they waited. Across Terra, landing ships struck the ground. More than half were destroyed before touchdown. The survivors released fresh armies, the rejected, the dispossessed, the deceived. Millions ran into Dorn's guns. Their deaths looked insane. But every corpse fed Horus's ritual. Every attack exhausted the defenders. Every moment of slaughter brought the demons closer. Raldoron watched the third line disappear beneath the horde. The enemy could spend lives faster than Terra could kill them. But the main wall still stood. Until the traitors reached it, the legions would not move. For now, their command remained unchanged. Watch, wait, slaughter, hold. Aisha entered the largest air battle in human history. Flying skill was almost meaningless. Shockwaves threw aircraft across the sky. Electromagnetic storms blinded instruments. Gravitic weapons flipped fighters out of control. Pilots navigated through fire with their own eyes. The Brighthawks still killed. Blue Zephyr destroyed one enemy fighter, then another. In any previous battle, either victory would have been remembered. Here, they disappeared inside the slaughter. Aisha could barely communicate with her squadron. Vox channels dissolved into static. Warning signals sounded constantly. There were too many enemies to track. Then she saw something strange. A formation of traitor aircraft descended directly toward the palace Aegis. Not approaching at an angle, not searching for an opening, flying straight at the shields. Two escort fighters struck the first layer. They vanished instantly. Their bodies and machines were thrown into the warp. The bombers behind them continued. A moment before impact, lance fire descended from orbit. Repeated strikes hammered one point of the Aegis. The outer shield collapsed. Then another layer weakened. One bomber was erased. The next passed through. Aisha understood. This was Perturabo's calculation. The destroyed aircraft were part of the timing. The lance strikes overloaded the shield as slower craft reached it. For a fraction of a second, the final layers became weak enough to penetrate. More bombers followed, not only at one point. 5 breaches opened across the daylight wall. One was above Sector 16. Aisha transmitted the warning. The bombers were targeting shield projectors and anti-aircraft guns. If those systems were destroyed, the temporary openings would become permanent. The traitors could pour through. Aisha looked at her squadron display. 3 Brighthawks were already dead. She had not seen them die. 4 fighters remained close enough to follow. Her second-in-command warned her not to descend. There was almost no space beneath the aegis. If they tried to climb back through, the shields might destroy them. If they rose too high, the bombardment would. Aisha ordered him to hold the upper battle. Then she took her flight down. Blue Zephyr dived toward the palace. The aegis filled her canopy. She looked once at the image of her husband. He had always called her reckless. Then her fighter struck the shield. 3 layers tried to tear the Panthera from reality. The controls fought her hands. Every warning system activated, but the aegis was weakened. Blue Zephyr forced through. The ground waited beneath her. Aisha pulled up before impact. Chemicals flooded her blood to keep her conscious. Her surviving pilots followed. Inside the shields, enemy bombers were already firing. Missiles struck defense towers, bombs fell on marshalling yards, void projectors exploded. Fire crossed the daylight wall. The Bright Hawks separated. Blue Zephyr destroyed one Reaper with a missile. The second fled between the palace towers. Aisha followed. Her fighter had been designed for open skies. Now she chased a bomber through streets built for processions. The Reaper's guns shattered windows. Aisha's shots burned across buildings. Finally, the bomber clipped a spire. It struck the ground and exploded. Aisha had no time to count the people killed beneath it. She turned back toward the wall. 3 things waited for her. The first was the destruction of Yancey's fighter. 3 enemy aircraft tore it apart. The second was another wave of bombers passing through the aegis. The third was the worst. Void projectors had been destroyed. Bombs now fell through the openings without resistance. They struck the defenses with the force of apocalypse. Perturabo had not broken the aegis. He had taught his aircraft how to pass through it. Every bomber that survived widened the path for those behind. Every destroyed gun reduced the cost of the next wave. The battle had never been about controlling the sky. It was about removing the locks from Terra's door. Aisha accelerated back into the fire. Her squadron was dying. The wall was burning. And above Sector 16, the opening continued to grow.
The breach reached Katsuhiro. Survivors from the 3rd line ran past his position. Some had abandoned their weapons. Others no longer understood where safety was. Veterans grabbed them and forced them to turn around. One runner ignored the command. A loyalist officer shot him in the back. The message was clear. The enemy waited ahead. Execution waited behind. Acting Captain Jinan formed the conscripts into 3 lines. The first lay prone. The second knelt. The third stood. Katsuhiro took his place in the middle. Mud soaked through his uniform. His lasgun shook in his hands. Ahead, a dark mass moved through the smoke. Jinan ordered everyone to hold fire. Doromek ignored him. The former sniper began killing targets before the others could see what they were. Then the horde came close enough. Beastmen. Human shapes with muzzles, horns, hooves, and blood-soaked fur. Katsuhiro felt only disgust. He did not know what had made them. He did not know what the Imperium had done to them. He saw monsters running toward him. Jinan gave the order. 3 lines opened fire. The first volley was ragged. The second was better. By the 5th, the beastmen were upon them. Each creature absorbed several laze bolts before falling. Some crossed the rampart in a single leap.
Hooves crushed helmets, mauls shattered bones, horns tore through bodies. The three lines collapsed into individual fights. One beastman charged Katsuhiro. For a fraction of a second, his life divided into two paths: move or die. Something inside him broke. Not courage, rage. Katsuhiro drove his bayonet into the creature's stomach. He pushed until it fell, then twisted the blade and watched it die. Another beastman came for him. A rifle shot destroyed its head. Doromek was still firing. The creatures were eventually forced back. Then larger shapes entered the smoke. They had once been human. Nothing human remained in their design. Masses of flesh moved on twisted legs. Arms emerged from open wounds. Tentacles carried hooks and claws. Human faces screamed from bodies built without order. Handlers drove the creatures forward with chains and arc whips. Laze fire burned their skin. It did not stop them. One seized a soldier and threw him through the air. Another vomited acid across the line. A spawn turned its single eye toward Katsuhiro. He fired. The shots barely marked it. Its handler pulled the chains and guided the creature toward him. Then a laze bolt killed the handler. The spawn turned upon the second man controlling it and swallowed him alive. The hard-faced woman from the conscription station attacked. She moved with a speed no untrained civilian should possess. She climbed the creature and threw a grenade into its mouth. The explosion tore it open from within. It still refused to die. Katsuhiro fired into its eye until the body stopped moving. Doromek pulled him away. Regular army troops had arrived. Heavy tanks advanced through the smoke. Their guns dismantled the remaining abominations. The surviving conscripts retreated behind disciplined infantry lines. For the first time since the attack began, the enemy withdrew. The conscripts cheered. The veterans did not. Katsuhiro asked Doromek what the larger creatures had been. Doromek had no answer. Katsuhiro had survived his first battle, but he had also seen the first evidence of what Horus's war had become. Not rebellion, not conquest. The destruction of the boundary between humanity and nightmare. At the Helios Gate, Raldaron received the report. Sector 16 had held. Barely. But traitor units were occupying sections of the captured outworks. If they were allowed to dig in, the next attack would begin closer to the main wall. Raldaron requested Mechanicum repair teams for the damaged shields. Too many projectors had already been destroyed. The outer aegis was failing. Then he made another decision. The Space Marines were still forbidden to advance. There was only one way to clear the captured positions. The palace guns would fire upon the outworks. Traitors would die. So would loyalists who had not withdrawn. Raldaron accepted responsibility. The order was transmitted. Katsuhiro heard the guns behind him change direction. He had survived the beastmen. Now the weapons he had been sent to protect were turning toward him.
The guns of the palace opened fire. Not on the enemy beyond the walls. On the outworks the enemy had already taken. Shells fell across the captured lines, turning fortifications and corpses into a burning landscape. Somewhere inside that devastation, the hard-faced woman who had fought beside Katsuhiro slipped away. Her name was Lydia Mismadra, and she had never been a loyal soldier. She moved through the smoke alone as surviving units rushed to reclaim their positions. Around her lay beastmen, loyalists, and rebels. The distinctions meant little to her. Both sides had been manipulated. Both sides believed they understood the war. Both sides were wrong. Ms. Madra served a purpose buried beneath layers of lies. Years earlier, a space marine had been waiting inside her home. He wore a hood. He had already judged her life and found a use for it. When she demanded his name, he gave the answer every warrior of his legion gave. I am Alfarius. Whether he truly was the Primarch did not matter. The Alpha Legion had chosen her. And then he told her the future. Horus would betray the Emperor. The Imperium would be broken. But according to the secret knowledge guiding the Alpha Legion, an Imperial victory would not save humanity. It would merely prolong its decay. Chaos would grow stronger over thousands of years until reality itself was consumed. There was only one path that offered the galaxy a chance. Horus had to win. Humanity had to destroy itself in a final storm of violence. Its extinction would starve the powers of the warp and preserve everything else. Ms. Madra asked why warriors created by the Emperor would help destroy everything he had built. The legionary answered with 3 words: for the Emperor. That was the truth the Alpha Legion gave her, or perhaps merely the lie most perfectly designed to recruit her. Even now, she did not know. Alfarius understood that money could not buy her. Power could not tempt her. What she wanted was meaning, a reason to believe her death might matter. The Alpha Legion offered her that reason. Serve us, the legionary had said, and you will still die. But you will not die in vain. Now, on the walls of the Imperial Palace, that promise brought her to a ruined command turret. 4 officers lay dead inside. The cogitators were still functioning. Ms. Madra searched the local defense network. Dorn had built every wall to support another. Every bastion covered its neighbor. But the men operating those defenses still needed maps, access codes, records. And someone had copied sensitive data onto a field cogitator. Ms. Madra found what she needed. Tunnels beneath the bastions. Hidden routes passing under the defensive lines. Opportunities. She took the officers' cipher keys and identification seals. Then she shot the cogitator until its memory burned. A figure appeared in the doorway. To everyone else, he was Doromek, the man promoted to acting lieutenant because he seemed to know how to survive. But Doromek was only another name. His true name was Ashul. He and Ms. Madra had served the Alpha Legion together. They had fought at Pluto. And still the Legion had found another use for them. Ashul warned her that soldiers would arrive soon. Ms. Madra warned him that he had become too visible. He had earned Jainen's trust. He had accepted rank. He had drawn Katsuhiro close. That was dangerous. But Ashul saw value in it. Influence opened doors that stealth could not. Jainen listened to him now. Katsuhiro trusted him. And frightened soldiers could become weapons without ever knowing whose hand directed them. Outside, the bombardment continued. The traitor attack had failed to hold the third line. But victory had never been the point. The Beastmen had forced the defenders to react. The bombers had shattered the shield projectors. The palace guns had erased the evidence. And in the confusion, 2 Alpha Legion operatives had gained access to the buried veins of Dorn's fortress. Ms. Madra and Ashul did not know whether they were saving the Emperor or condemning him. Perhaps not even the Alpha Legion knew anymore. But the mission remained. When Ashul reminded her that they were going to die, Ms. Madra did not deny it. She only repeated the promise that governed both their lives. Not in vain. While Alpha Legion agents worked beneath the smoke, the masters of the invasion gathered above Terra and turned upon one another. Inside the vengeful spirit, Angron demanded an immediate assault. He wanted the walls broken, the streets drowned in blood. Perturabo called him an animal. Fulgrim mocked them both. Horus was late. Without the Warmaster, the Council of Primarchs became a cage filled with starving beasts. Abaddon watched in disgust. These were the Emperor's sons. Now Angron could barely speak without roaring. Fulgrim treated war as entertainment. Perturabo saw insult in every command. They had gained the power of gods and lost the discipline of men. Abaddon stepped between them. He silenced Angron's transmission. Then he called them what they had become: slaves. Slaves to rage. Slaves to pride. Slaves to the gods they believed had elevated them. Fulgrim warned that Abaddon was only a mortal in the court of divinities. Perturabo threatened him. Abaddon did not retreat. He reminded them that Horus had banished Lorgar for attempting to seize power. If the Warmaster could cast aside one brother, he could destroy another. Then Horus entered. He appeared strong again. Horus placed one talon upon his first captain's shoulder. Abaddon is correct. He ordered his brothers to heed Ezekiel as they would heed him. Abaddon was his sword arm. Then Horus revealed the next phase of the invasion. Sota Nol and 8 corrupted adepts of the Dark Mechanicum appeared before the council. They were mixtures of machine, flesh, and mutation. Silver lines connected their images into the 8-pointed star of chaos. The shield around the palace had weakened. Its outer defenses were damaged. Its fighter squadrons were dying. Now, immense Mechanicum arcs would descend across Terra and form 8 points around the Imperial palace. They would become fortresses, siege camps, foundations from which engines could be raised to break Dorn's walls. Perturabo erupted. Breaking the palace was supposed to be his honor. Dorn was his rival. The fortress was his challenge. But Horus knew how to control him. The Mechanicum would only prepare the ground. Perturabo would still design the true siege. He would still prove his genius against Dorn's. The Lord of Iron accepted. But the arcs had another purpose. The Emperor's psychic aegis still denied Terra to the Neverborn. It kept demon armies from manifesting. It kept the transformed Primarchs from reaching the surface. Every death weakened that barrier. Every murdered soul pressed against the veil. The siege camps would force Dorn into an impossible choice. If the Loyalists attacked, their blood would feed the warp. If they remained behind the walls, the traitors could build unopposed. Either decision served Horus. A bridgehead built from blood. Angron demanded the right to lead the assault. Then another voice answered him. Quiet, rasping, wet with decay. Mortarion entered the court, but the Primarch of the Death Guard was no longer the warrior his brothers remembered. He had become taller, thinner. Tattered wings rose from his back. Disease scarred his face. Filth leaked from his armor. A fog of rot surrounded him. Horus's Terminators began choking when he passed. Black fluid spilled through their seals. Aximand and Kibra collapsed.
Even Zardu Layak struggled to breathe. Mortarion did not attack them. His existence was enough. Only Horus, Abaddon, and Tormageddon remained untouched. Abaddon looked upon the Lord of Death and saw no triumph. Only another Primarch who had traded command for slavery. Mortarion approached the throne and knelt. "My Warmaster, I heed your call." He had come to claim the first assault upon the palace. His sons were ready. They had survived the Destroyer Plague and emerged transformed. The Death Guard no longer feared sickness. They carried it. Mortarion promised 7 plagues for Terra, invisible armies of bacteria and virus that would reap lives by the million. When the tally pleased Nurgle, Mortarion would descend and take his vengeance upon the Emperor. Horus granted him the honor. Once the Mechanicum established its camps, the Death Guard would be the first traitor legion to attack Terra. Angron howled in protest. Horus ended the argument. "It is my will." The second phase of the invasion would begin that night.
The second phase did not begin with a single decisive assault. It became a pattern. For 2 weeks, the enemy repeated the same cycle. Warships in orbit hammered the edges of the Imperial Aegis. Bombers and fighters descended through the weakened shield. They strafed trenches, destroyed gun emplacements, killed the crews rebuilding what had been destroyed the day before. The shields above the heart of the palace remained unbroken. The outer defenses were not so fortunate. Kilometers of fortifications vanished beneath orbital fire. The flattened plain before the daylight wall was transformed into a wasteland of craters and broken ridges. The ground shook as weapons disturbed the crust of Terra itself. And between each bombardment, more soldiers landed. They crossed the wasteland in waves. They reached the trenches. They died. Then another wave came. For Katsuhiro, the siege of Terra became less like a battle and more like a new form of existence. The sun disappeared behind ash clouds. Winds carried the dust of burned cities across the Himalaysian heights. Spring was approaching, but it brought no relief. The energy poured onto Terra warmed the atmosphere. Snow became freezing rain. The ground turned to mud. Blood soaked into it. Fragments of the dead became part of the earth beneath the defenders' boots. Most conscripts still wore the clothes in which they had been drafted. They had no uniforms, no clean water, nothing with which to wash. Soon everyone wore the same color: gray dust, dried blood, filth. Katsuhiro cut a hole in his blanket and wore it as a poncho. Later, he took warmer clothing from the dead. It was stained with blood, excrement, and rotting flesh. He no longer cared. The enemy might kill him during an assault. The cold tried to kill him every hour. Sometimes toxic rain fell from the clouds. It smelled of metal. Those who drank it died. Some drank because thirst had defeated caution. Radiation poisoned the trenches. Katsuhiro's hair began to fall out. His teeth loosened in his gums. One night, he said what everyone already knew. "We're all dead. The question is, when?" An older soldier named Runakan answered him. That was the question asked the moment anyone was born. Sleep came in fragments.
4 hours on watch, then labor, then battle, then more labor. The defenders rebuilt trenches under the supervision of Mechanicum adepts. They dug new lines around the surviving bastions. They linked broken positions. They turned wreckage into strong points. Dorn's circles of defense were recreated again and again. Then the bombardment returned. The trenches disappeared. The soldiers inside them disappeared. And the digging began again. The ground became easier to cut because the shells had shattered the stone. But human flesh had been churned into the soil. The dead became mortar for the walls built by the living. Burning wreckage fell from orbit like shooting stars. Every time Katsuhiro saw one, he made the same wish. Do not let me die. Then an entire capital ship appeared through the clouds. Its back was broken. Its hull burned from end to end. It fell directly toward the center of the Imperial palace. Men abandoned their positions to watch. The vessel vanished behind the walls. Someone shouted that the Emperor had fallen. Then a second sun rose over the palace. The explosion bleached the world white. Its shockwave rolled across the distant mountains. Soldiers wept. For a moment, they believed the war was over. Then the palace guns fired again. The Aegis had consumed the falling ship. Its mass and energy had been cast into the warp before it could annihilate the inner sanctum. The Emperor still lived. So did they. And therefore, the siege continued. Bastion 16 fired without rest. Its macro cannons struck the horizon while its las cannons and anti-aircraft weapons tore at the sky. The thunder became so constant that Katsuhiro only noticed when it stopped. Behind it, Bastions 15 and 14 guarded the deeper approaches. Then Bastion 14 took a direct orbital hit. Its magazines detonated. The fortress became a blackened stump. Bastion 15 followed soon after. Katsuhiro lost all sense of time. Life became a chain of horrifying moments separated by exhausted fear. Before this, the rebellion had been distant, a shadow over the future. Now Katsuhiro lived inside it. This was how the siege established its rhythm. Bombardment, attack, death, reconstruction, repeat, until the rhythm changed.
The rhythm changed on the 14th day. Above Terra, the World Eaters were tearing themselves apart. Angron had been denied the first assault. He did not accept it. With no enemy close enough to kill, World Eaters turned upon one another. Squads fought in the corridors. Some legionaries attempted to force open the hangars. They wanted to reach Terra before their father. Angron came for them. None shall depart. The demon Primarch butchered his own sons for daring to claim the first blood of the throne world. Their blades cut into him. His wounds closed. He crushed one warrior against a wall until armor and bone collapsed together. Karn followed, struggling to control both his Primarch and himself. He ordered every hangar sealed. Weapons were primed to kill anyone who tried to leave. Then the nails overwhelmed him. Karn roared praise to the blood god and joined Angron in slaughtering their own legion. The World Eaters had come to conquer Terra. They could barely survive waiting for permission. Elsewhere in orbit, the invasion moved forward with mechanical precision.
8 immense vessels began their descent. They were not landing craft. They were arc mechanicums, void ships the size of asteroids. Each carried one of Sota Null's disciples and the machinery required to begin the true siege. One was the Pent Ark. Its master, Clain Pent, existed as a brain hidden inside an armored host body. But even he felt fear as the palace batteries targeted his vessel. Defense lasers struck during its descent. Void shields burned out one by one. The shields annihilated pockets of atmosphere, hurling the Ark through violent shocks. Pent ordered a faster descent. Remaining in the sky meant death. Terra emerged through the ash. The Imperial palace filled the horizon. Its defensive lines crossed the shattered plain. Thousands of fires burned around them. The Aegis shimmered beneath the bombardment, revealing layers of protection unlike anything the Mechanicum had created. The Pent Ark fell toward the eastern approaches near the daylight wall. The vessel would never return to space after this landing. That did not matter. The Ark had ceased to be a ship. It was becoming a fortress. Its engines screamed. Its immense mass struck Terra and held. Pent redirected the surviving void shields. They locked against the ground and expanded around the vessel. Then the Ark opened. Its armored sides unfolded like petals. Ramps extended. The servants of the Dark Mechanicum marched out. At 7 other points around the palace, 7 more arcs did the same. The 8-pointed star was no longer only a symbol. It had been built around the Emperor's fortress. Machines poured from the vessels. Cyborgs, tech thralls, forbidden intelligences. Automata driven by imprisoned warp entities. Giant excavators raised banks of broken stone. Servitors burned tunnels into the ground. Command posts rose behind fresh trenches. Armored Mechanicum adepts walked through incoming fire as though the battle were beneath their notice. The palace guns turned upon them. That was part of the plan. Every shot aimed at the arcs was a shot no longer falling upon the mortal hordes. Traitor armies surged deeper into the ruined outworks while the Loyalists tried to stop the siege camps from forming. They failed. Within 2 hours, the foundations were complete. More machines advanced beyond the protection of the arcs. Some carried walls of adamantium. Others projected mobile energy barriers. They moved into position with perfect coordination. Then rose-colored shields ignited between them. The siege camps disappeared behind walls of light. The trap Horus had described was now real. If Dorn sent troops to destroy the camps, their deaths would weaken the Aegis. If he waited, the Mechanicum would assemble weapons capable of breaking the palace. Clain Pent reviewed the plans stored inside his mind. The Ordo Reductor would soon begin constructing its great cannons. But Pent had another project, something larger. It would require monumental engineering, sorcery, and a soul powerful enough to animate it. Behind the new shields, his machines began to work. The outer battle had been a sacrifice. The landing was the bridgehead. Now the siege of Terra could truly begin.
As the enemy built its fortresses, Sanguinius walked the walls. The vision of his own death haunted him, Horus standing above him, triumphant, waiting. Dorn wanted the great angel kept safe. To him, Sanguinius was more valuable as a symbol than a warrior. Sanguinius hated that truth, but he understood it. So he traveled across the perimeter defenses, surrounded by the splendor of his legion. He allowed the people to see him. Where he passed, riots stopped. Fear loosened its grip. Eventually, Sanguinius reached the Helios Gate. Rogal reported that the shattered walls had been repaired. Imperial fists sealed the breaches. Salamanders restored damaged guns. But 87 of Raldoran's way castles had been damaged. 4 were gone. The aegis around the daylight wall weakened with every air attack. Beyond it, the dark mechanicum worked behind glowing shields. Sanguinius understood the trap. The siege camps were part fortress and part ritual. Their construction would break the walls, but the blood spilled destroying them would help break the Emperor's psychic protection. Fight, and the loyalists fed chaos. Wait, and the traitors grew stronger. Damnation waited behind both choices. Raldoran spoke of the conscripts still fighting in the outworks. Their numbers diminished every day. Sometimes he was forced to bombard positions they had occupied only hours earlier. Dorn had forbidden the Blood Angels from helping them. He had also forbidden Sanguinius from fighting outside the walls. He had not forbidden him from visiting. The great angel descended into the mud. Katsuhiro saw him arrive. For weeks, everything had been gray: the sky, the trenches, the living, the dead. Then Sanguinius appeared in gold and crimson, a memory of purity in a world that had forgotten it. Soldiers stopped working. They fell to their knees. Filthy hands reached toward the Primarch. His guards tried to hold them back. Sanguinius stopped them. One woman touched the feathers of his wings. Then others gathered around him. For a moment, his presence silenced their fear. Katsuhiro felt his fever ease. His pain faded. He felt whole again. Sanguinius thanked them in the names of Dorn and the Emperor. He told them to remain brave. Then he moved on. The light went with him. What remained was mud, disease, and another assignment. Captain Jinan was seriously ill. Sores covered his mouth. Coughing bent him double until he vomited blood-streaked phlegm. The sickness was spreading through the outworks. Medicine did nothing. Dorimek suspected biological warfare. Perhaps Mortarion's plagues had reached Terra before his legion. But Dorimek had brought Jinan another concern. Supply tunnels ran beneath the battlefield. Bombardment had broken some open. They might offer infiltrators a path behind the lines. Jinan ordered an investigation. Katsuhiro went with Dorimek. So did Runakan and Ms. Madra. The 4 descended through a bunker into darkness. Dirty water covered the tunnel floor. Shell impacts had twisted the passage and pulled its sections apart. Ms. Madra used a cipher wand to open sealed routes. Runakan noticed. He also noticed how she and Dorimek moved together. They claimed to barely know one another. Runakan did not believe them. Katsuhiro refused to listen. Dorimek had kept him alive. In a place where death arrived every hour, that was enough to earn trust. They followed the tunnels through collapsed junctions and flooded passages. The routes were too narrow for armies, too broken to move supplies. At their furthest point, a sealed plate marked with the number 16 blocked the way. Dorimek declared the tunnels harmless. They turned back. At the foot of the stairs, Katsuhiro stopped. Something had changed. The ground was no longer shaking.
The roar that had filled every moment of his life was gone. The orbital bombardment had stopped. Katsuhiro rushed outside. Across the trenches, exhausted soldiers looked toward the silent sky. Then they began to cheer. They believed the enemy had exhausted its fury. Only the veterans remained watchful. Doromek did not smile. The traitors had never cared if their shells killed their own mortal troops. If they had stopped firing now, the next wave was different. They were protecting what was coming. For the first time, Horus was not sending cannon fodder. He was sending his sons.
The silence lasted only minutes. Then the white scars came over the wall. 1,000 jet bikes, speeders, and gunships plunged toward the Mechanicum siege camp facing the Helios Gate. At their head rode Jaghatai Khan. The Warhawk had never been made to wait behind stone. His warriors passed through the enemy shields at killing speed. They tore through tech thralls, shattered generators, and cut open defensive lines before the Mechanicum could react. Jaghatai was not seeking glory. He was gathering information. Around the grounded ark, machines of impossible scale were being assembled. Breaching cannons designed to destroy the Aegis. Frameworks large enough to become siege towers. The Khan recorded everything. Then he ordered the withdrawal and called the guns of the palace onto the exposed camp. The white scars raced home as the horizon vanished beneath Imperial fire. They had struck hard, but Horus had been waiting for the same opening. The bombardment resumed. Poison shells burst above the outworks. Colored clouds descended across the trenches. Soldiers who could not fit their masks died screaming. Others ran blind through the fog as their lungs dissolved. Then the drop pods arrived. Death Guard vessels crashed into the earth among the defenders. The first traitor legion had reached the palace. Through the poison came giants in corroded green and white armor. They continued advancing through wounds that should have killed any space marine. Katsuhiro fired with the rest of the Kushtun Naganda. His lasgun barely marked their armor. Blood angels stood among the conscripts and answered with bolter fire. Then the mortal hordes charged behind Mortarion's sons. The outworks disappeared into gas and slaughter. Above them, the returning white scars were caught by haywire fire. Jaghatai's jet bike died beneath him. The Khan struck the earth beyond his legion, isolated inside the poisonous fog. The Death Guard understood what had fallen into their hands. Hundreds closed around him. Jaghatai attacked first. His tulwar cut through armor and diseased flesh. He killed them in ranks. But Mortarion's sons did not fear death. They surrounded him. After his 40th kill, a combat knife entered the back of his knee. The infection began overwhelming his engineered body. His strength failed. The Death Guard dragged him down beneath their weight. An executioner raised a rusted axe. Jaghatai looked upon the death he had chosen. I am Jaghatai Khan, loyal son of the Emperor, and I have ridden well. The axe never fell. White scars burst through the fog. Jaghatai tore the poisoned blade from his leg and rose again. But a full company of Death Guard still stood between him and the palace. The Khan saluted them. He prepared to charge. Then another voice crossed the battlefield. My brother! To the aid of my brother! Sanguinius fell from the sky like a golden comet. His sword and spear ripped through the Death Guard line.
Blood angels, white scars, and human soldiers followed him. Katsuhiro charged with them. For one impossible moment, two Primarchs fought side by side in the mud. The Angel and the Warhawk. Sanguinius demanded that they retreat. Jaghatai refused until he recovered the intelligence stored within his ruined jetbike. A gunship finally carried both Primarchs over the wall. The instant they entered the Emperor's strongest protection, the plague inside Jaghatai began to withdraw. The knife that had poisoned him crumbled into dust. Mortarion's sons were no longer merely legionaries. They had become vessels of disease. In the outworks, the survivors fell back. The Death Guard withdrew after bringing plague artillery close enough to fire into the palace. The third defensive line was finished. Katsuhiro returned to the rampart and found Runakon lying dead. At first, he saw no wound. Doromek appeared behind him, calm and unmasked. He called the death bad luck. But Runakon had spent his final hours warning Katsuhiro about Doromek and Ms. Madra. When Doromek left, Katsuhiro turned the body over. A single lash burn marked Runakon's back, placed directly over the heart. He had not been killed by the enemy. Someone inside the lines had silenced him.
The Death Guard assault changed the war. It also divided the loyalist Primarchs. Dorn ordered the legions to remain at the palace. If the Emperor died, Terra and the Imperium died with him. Jaghatai saw the cost of that calculation. Across the planet, cities were falling. Billions of civilians had been abandoned to plague, mutants, and traitor armies because the legions guarded the palace. The Khan refused to accept it. He promised that half of the White Scars would remain with Dorn. The rest would ride across Terra and defend its people. Dorn forbade him. Jaghatai left anyway. The Warhawk would return when the final battle came. Until then, he would fight the war he believed the Emperor had created him to fight. A war for humanity, not merely for walls. Above Terra, Horus prepared those walls for destruction. Perturabo arrived aboard the Vengeful Spirit and found a ship corrupted by the warp. The Lord of Iron despised what his brothers had become. Angron, Fulgrim, Magnus, and Mortarion had traded their freedom for power. Perturabo believed himself wiser. He would master chaos without serving it. Horus knew exactly how to use that pride. He called Perturabo the greatest siege master in the galaxy. The Dark Mechanicum could build camps. Demons could spill blood. But only the Lord of Iron could break Dorn. Horus gave him command of the siege, and one greater task: find a way to deliver Titan legions beyond the walls and directly into the heart of the palace. Perturabo accepted. For another month, the defenders suffered. 7 plagues moved through the outworks. Bodies erupted with boils. Lungs filled, flesh decayed, medicine failed. Katsuhiro's unit was merged with other shattered formations until nothing remained of the Kushtun Naganda but a name. Still Bastion 16 held. Then the bombardment stopped again. This time, the sky itself spoke. Zardu Layak appeared above Terra as a face stretched across the clouds. Beneath him floated an impossible island of bone. 8,000 mutilated priests surrounded his pulpit. The Crimson Apostle offered surrender.
He declared that the Emperor had lied to humanity, that the imperial truth had hidden the existence of the gods, that those who turned against the palace would be rewarded, those who refused would be consumed. The palace guns fired through the vision. Nothing touched it. At Leak's command, the priests tore open their robes. They raised their knives. Then all 8,000 drove the blades into their own hearts. Their blood poured onto Terra. The ritual was complete. The Emperor's barrier weakened. Rain began to fall upon the walls. Red, warm, blood from an empty sky. Beyond the siege camps, immense engines advanced. Sirens sounded across the palace. Rogal Dorn answered Leak's sermon with an oath. Blood angels, imperial fists, human soldiers, and mechanicum troops swore together. They denied the gods. They denied the traitors. They would stand for Terra. Then Dorn spoke across every vox channel in the palace. The time for speeches is done. They are coming. Kill them all. Horus's fleet moved. The Night Lords descended through the storm. Their raptors flew ahead of the main attack, changing as they fell. Bones lengthened, feet became talons. Their legion's degeneration was no longer something hidden. Lupercal led them through the defensive fire. He struck the battlements with 30 raptors at his back. The defenders had expected siege towers. They had not expected monsters to fall from the clouds. The Night Lords killed the first warriors in their path and secured a landing point. Lupercal raised his weapons. "We are first on the wall." But another monster had also been released. Angron had become uncontrollable aboard the Conqueror. Karn and Lotara Sarin transferred him to the Night Lord's flagship, imprisoning him inside the labyrinth Perturabo had once designed to torment Vulcan. The maze delayed him. It could not hold him forever. When the assault began, the Night Lords opened the prison to rid themselves of their guest. Angron emerged into open space. Terra hung below him. The laws of nature no longer mattered. The demon Primarch spread his wings and threw himself into the void. The Night Lords had reached the wall. Angron was descending toward the throne world, and the blood ritual had opened the way. The first assault struck every level of the defense at once. Human armies drowned the second line beneath bodies. Behind them came 3 immense siege towers, and from the Mechanicum camps, weapons built to murder shields opened fire. A beam of black energy struck the Aegis. The Emperor's barrier bent. Darkness spread across it like living tar. Then one section failed. The siege towers advanced toward the opening. Katsuhiro ran for the tunnels as the outworks vanished beneath fire. There he found Ms. Madra and Doromek beside explosives planted beneath Bastion 16. They were saboteurs. Doromek's true name was Ashul, and now even he doubted the Alpha Legion's purpose. They had no orders and no proof that destroying the Bastion truly served the Emperor. Ms. Madra no longer cared. She had built her life around that promise. Now she would die for it. She gave Ashul 1 minute to escape. Katsuhiro slipped away before they saw him. Then Bastion 16 exploded. The last great obstacle before the Helios Gate disappeared. World Eaters poured through the flames. Behind them came Angron. The demon Primarch overturned tanks with his hands. Artillery struck him. His flesh regenerated. Nothing in the outworks could stop him. On the wall, Gendor Scrivok advanced behind the power of his demon sword. The weapon made him almost untouchable. Then he challenged Raldoron. The demon abandoned him. Suddenly, Scrivok was only a murderer facing one of the finest warriors of the Blood Angels. Raldoron broke his armor and drove him to the edge. The painted count begged. Raldoron remembered every victim of the Night Lords. "Now get off my wall." Scrivok fell. The stone shattered his body far below. The Night Lord's assault collapsed with him, but the surviving siege tower had nearly reached the battlements. Death Guard filled its interior. Drop pods continued falling. Angron and the World Eaters approached the gate. Then the Helios Gate opened. Raldoron believed they had been betrayed, but Sanguinius had given the order. The great angel remembered what Jaghatai had told them. They fought for humanity, not walls. The surviving conscripts would be given 3 minutes to reach safety. Thousands ran toward the light of the palace. Imperial fists formed a corridor around them. Katsuhiro staggered between the warriors. Angron came straight toward the open gate. Then Titans of Legio Solaria marched through it. Their weapons struck the Red Angel with the force used to destroy cities. Angron vanished inside fire. The Titans turned upon the siege tower. Sanguinius and his sons fought across its bridge while the god machines tore it apart. The tower collapsed before the Death Guard could establish a breach. The defenders threw the remaining traitors from the battlements. For one moment, the wall belonged to the Imperium again. Angron rose from the flames. He flew toward Sanguinius. The Blood Angels opened fire. Their weapons did nothing. Sanguinius lowered his own. The Emperor's ward allowed Angron onto Terra. It did not allow him into the palace. The Red Angel stopped before the invisible barrier. He challenged Sanguinius to face him outside. Sanguinius refused. Angron could rage, he could kill. He could not pass. Not yet. The Helios Gate closed after the survivors entered. Katsuhiro was carried to the Medicae stations. As sedatives pulled him into darkness, he saw Ashel among the refugees. The Alpha Legion agent saluted him, then disappeared into the palace. Ms. Madra was dead. Ashel's mission continued, and the victory changed nothing. The veil between reality and the warp was breaking. At the foot of the wall, the demon within Scrivok offered to save his life. He accepted. His reward was eternal torment. Above Terra, Horus fought the Emperor in the warp while his body sat empty upon the vengeful spirit. Abaddon watched him weakening. Zardu Lyak admitted the truth. Horus carried the power of 4 gods. But even a Primarch's soul was finite. That power was burning him away. If the siege lasted too long, the Warmaster might die before claiming victory. And if Horus failed, chaos would not end with him. Another champion would rise.
The victory at Helios bought the palace time. Perturabo used it to choose the next wall. His target was the Lion's Gate spaceport. It was not merely a landing field. It was a city built upward, a mountain of docks, shipyards, transit lines, armories, and habitation levels rising more than 60 kilometers above Terra. If Horus captured it intact, he could land armies, titans, and warships beside the Imperial palace. To Forix of the Iron Warriors, leaving such a prize standing was Dorn's greatest mistake. Perturabo knew better. Dorn did not make mistakes. The spaceport was bait, so the Lord of Iron chose Kruger to command the assault. Kruger was direct, violent, predictable, exactly the sort of commander Dorn would expect Perturabo to use as a weapon. While the defenders studied Kruger's obvious attack, Forix would lead the hidden one. Perturabo called it a sledgehammer used to pick a lock. Dorn also saw the danger. Malkador asked whether the traitor's concentration around the spaceport might be a mistake. Dorn refused to believe it. Perturabo was many things. A fool was not one of them. But the palace was under attack everywhere. Dorn could not allow one threat to dictate the entire defense. He placed Fafnir Ran in command of Lion's Gate. 18,000 Imperial fists, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, enough guns to challenge warships. Ran understood the order. Hold, no matter what came. Far from the palace, another army was still traveling toward the war. Zenobi Adedeji had once worked on a factory line in Adaba. She understood machines, schedules, obedience. Then the levies came, and the factory workers became soldiers. They called themselves the Adaba Free Corps. Zenobi carried their banner. Their journey across Terra lasted weeks. Officers disappeared for secret interviews. Those accused of loyalty to the wrong master were executed. Integrity officers questioned every soldier. When Zenobi was asked where her loyalty lay, she answered without hesitation. Adaba, her family, her comrades. She believed she was traveling to defend Terra. She did not yet understand whose Terra she had been chosen to defend. At Lion's Gate, the attack began. The Iron Warriors sent mortal troops first. Traitor regiments, beastmen, slaves driven forward beneath their own artillery. Ran's guns destroyed them by the thousands. The highways became rivers of bodies. But the dead were only measuring the defenses. Every gun that fired revealed its position. Every counterattack exposed another reserve. Kruger watched. Forix watched. Perturabo watched them all. Then the real assault moved. 500 World Eaters transports accelerated along Highway 2. Karn rode at their head with Gorechild raised. Super heavy tanks counterattacked. Angron descended upon them. The Red Angel tore open a Capital Imperialis and butchered everyone inside. Weapons capable of killing Titans struck him without effect. The Loyalist armor withdrew before a creature it could neither slow nor understand. Angron raced toward the spaceport. Then the Emperor's ward stopped him. He struck the invisible barrier again and again. He could stand upon Terra. He could not enter territory still protected by the Aegis. The World Eaters were left trapped beneath the port's guns. For a moment, the nails released Karn enough to understand. Without Angron, the charge had failed. He ordered a retreat. Elsewhere, Fulgrim and the Emperor's children met the same barrier. The transformed Primarchs could not enter. But ordinary Space Marines could. So could mortals. So could
machines. Perturabo had never expected demons to win the port for him. The failed attacks were another measurement, another layer removed, another question answered. Ran saw only that the first wave had broken. The defenders cheered. The Iron Warriors did not. They had begun exactly as planned. Artillery continued pounding the spaceport. Fresh armies moved toward the highways, and beneath the obvious battle, Horus prepared the concealed blade. Lion's Gate had survived the opening assault. Now the enemy knew precisely how to kill it.
The second assault did not begin with more soldiers. It began with infection. Horus ordered Perturabo to accept the aid of Zardu-Lyak. The Lord of Iron hated sorcery, but conventional weapons could not remove the Emperor's ward from Lion's Gate. Lyak proposed a union of material sabotage and warp ritual. Perturabo would create the physical breach. The Crimson Apostle would create the spiritual one. A demon called Korbak's Utter Blight was chosen for the task, not to charge the walls, to poison them. While Lyak prepared his ritual, Kroger renewed the assault. Mortal hordes surged across the highways. Aircraft struck the upper docks. Iron Warriors' artillery pounded every level. The attacks seemed crude. They were meant to. Hidden among the bodies were 1,000 Iron Warriors led by Horus. Their armor had been covered in blood and filth. Their systems remained silent. They advanced inside the mortal tide until siege mutants broke open maintenance entrances at the base of the spaceport. Then they disappeared inside. A second infiltration began higher within the structure. Archmagos Inar Satariel and corrupted Mechanicum forces seized a control station. They introduced a technophage into the port's machine network. Systems began lying to their operators. Sensors reported enemies where none existed. Real attackers vanished from displays. Doors opened for traitors. Others sealed loyalists inside. Lion's Gate had become a fortress unable to trust its own senses. Horus pushed upward through the core. He avoided the main defensive concentrations and gathered scattered Iron Warriors as he advanced. The spaceport's size now worked against its defenders. Fafnir Ran could not know which attacks were real. He moved forces against ghosts, while the concealed blade traveled toward the heart. Then Abaddon joined the battle. 3,000 sons of Horus entered the spaceport with him. He had grown sick of watching priests and primarchs decide the war. The Justaran broke Imperial fists formations that had held against everything else. Lyak followed behind, carving symbols into command systems with the blood of the dead. The spaceport's orbital augurs failed. Ran was blinded above, below, and within. 4 days into the assault, enemy signs appeared across every level. Ran asked Dorn for permission to destroy the bridges connecting Lion's Gate to the palace. Dorn refused. The spaceport still had value, and the garrison would continue buying time. Ran understood what that meant. He was not being asked to win. He was being asked to make the enemy pay. Inside the palace, the same war had taken another form. Katsuhiro had survived the outworks only to be assigned to the quarantine district known as Poxville. Mortarion's diseases had followed the refugees inside. The sick changed. The dead moved. Something unseen hunted through the barracks.
Katsuhiro and the other survivors opened fire upon shapes that should not have existed. A custodian named Amon Toramakian came to investigate. His trail led away from disease and toward belief. Euphrates Keeler had escaped confinement. The woman once called the Saint now moved among the refugees with Kirill Cinderman. They carried the Lectitio Divinitatis. They preached that the emperor was not merely a ruler. He was a god. Amon considered that belief another kind of plague. It spread without orders, without leaders, through symbols, whispered phrases, and desperate people who needed hope more than food. Yet Keeler claimed faith was humanity's only defense against the powers attacking Terra. If chaos was real, denial offered no protection. The Emperor's light did. Amon did not believe her, but Malkador had allowed Keeler to remain free. He understood that weapons could not defeat every enemy now entering the palace. Back at Lionsgate, the traitors pressed deeper. Foryx's hidden force moved toward the spaceport's heart. Abaddon attacked from another direction. The technophage continued corrupting the defense grid. And beneath it all, Korbak's utter blight pressed against reality. Perturabo's assault had ceased to be a battle for walls. It was a battle for systems, for knowledge, for belief. Ran still commanded hundreds of thousands, but his army was being divided into isolated pockets. Lionsgate remained standing. Inside, it was already beginning to die.
Lionsgate fought for 21 days. Ran refused to surrender the initiative. He gathered 10,000 Imperial fists and drove into the upper levels to destroy the traitor landing zones. Across the spaceport, Loyalist forces counterattacked. For a time, the Yellow Line pushed the Iron Warriors back, but every victory cost defenders who could not be replaced. The technophage continued spreading. Power failed. Communications vanished. The fortress killed its defenders while the enemy advanced through it. Dorn finally committed Sigismund and a fresh Imperial Fists force. The first captain stabilized the approaches to the sky bridges, but Euphrates Keeler's words haunted him. She had once told Sigismund that he had been chosen. Now reports placed Abaddon inside the spaceport. Sigismund began to see destiny where Dorn demanded discipline. Deeper inside, Foryx's concealed force was dying. Almost 80% of his warriors had fallen. They had penetrated far beyond support, following a plan that seemed designed to spend their lives. Still, they fought on. Foryx met Ran during a Loyalist breakout. The two commanders crashed together. Ran's axes cut into Foryx's armor. Foryx's power fist shattered Ran's chest and drove him to the floor. The killing blow descended. A black sword intercepted it. Sigismund had arrived. He saved Ran and drove the Iron Warriors back. But the Loyalists were no closer to recovering the port. Kroger filled captured levels with phosphex. Abaddon and the sons of Horus advanced toward the bridges. Iron warriors poured in from above and below. The Loyalist garrison contracted around the final routes into the palace. Dorn still possessed one answer. A hidden mechanized army waited beyond the main battle. At the correct moment, it would strike the traitor flank, while Sigismund attacked from inside Lionsgate. The two forces would crush Perturabo's army between them. Among that reserve stood the Adaba Free Corps. Zenobi had survived the long journey. Through everything, she protected the banner entrusted to her. When the order came, She believed every sacrifice had finally gained meaning. The mechanized reserve prepared to advance. Tank engines started. Artillery crews loaded their guns. Zenobie climbed onto the command vehicle beside General Captain Egwu. Then she removed the cover from the Adaba banner. The cloth beneath was red. At its center was the black eye of Horus. The Adaba Free Corps opened fire. Not on the traitors, on Dorn's hidden army. Demolition charges planted among the vehicles exploded. Command tanks vanished. Artillery batteries burned. Soldiers who had believed Adaba loyal were murdered before they understood the betrayal. The integrity officers had never been searching for servants of Horus. They had been eliminating anyone still loyal to the Emperor. Zenobie had not crossed Terra to save the palace. She had been delivered to the exact place where one regiment could destroy Dorn's counterattack. The reserve collapsed before it moved. At Bab Bastion, all contact with Lionsgate disappeared. Dorn understood immediately. The port's sensors had been inverted, its communications blocked, its remaining defenders isolated. And above it, an immense vessel descended from orbit. The Iron Blood, Perturabo's flagship. This had never been only an attempt to seize another fortress. The spaceport was the gateway that would bring the Iron Warriors' full strength directly to the palace. Dorn gave the order he had resisted for 3 weeks. Withdraw. Sigismund argued that Abaddon was still within reach. Dorn silenced him. The lives of his warriors were not currency for prophecy or personal glory. The first captain would hold the sky bridges only long enough for the survivors to escape. Then, Lion's Gate would be abandoned. Sigismund obeyed. Ran lived, broken but evacuated. Forix looked upon the descending Iron Blood and felt no triumph. His legion had won, but it had become something he no longer recognized. Warriors sought the favor of gods. Kroger descended into bloodlust. Perturabo claimed victories purchased with his sons' lives. Forix had once believed the Iron Warriors endured because they were stronger than iron. Now he understood the truth. Iron could break. Lion's Gate belonged to the traitors. Beyond its bridges stood the next wall, and Perturabo had come to face Dorn himself. Lion's Gate had fallen. On the sky bridges, Sigismund met Karn. Now Karn carried the strength of Khorne. Gorechild tore through Sigismund's armor. The first captain understood what Keeler's prophecy had concealed. Skill was no longer enough. Karn raised his axe to finish him. Then Rogal Dorn landed between them. One strike from Storm's Teeth hurled Karn across the bridge. Dorn had come to cover the retreat, and to confront the brother who had taken the spaceport from him. Zardu Lyak barred Dorn's path. The Crimson Apostle knew he could not defeat a Primarch. That was not his purpose. He gathered every fragment of warp power around himself. Then he spoke to Abaddon. Remember this moment. I give my life so that you will take my place upon the path to glory. Lyak detonated. The psychic blast threw Dorn through the air. The Crimson Apostle vanished. In the crater where he had stood, demons began pulling themselves into reality. The Emperor's ward had been breached. For the first time, true Neverborn stood upon the soil of the Imperial Palace. Elsewhere,
Korbak's Utterblight attacked through faith itself. The Lightbearers had gathered around Euphrates Keeler. They believed their prayers strengthened the Emperor. But their leader, Olivier, had woven the language of Nurgle into their worship. Life within death, breath upon the lips, hope within the heart. The congregation's devotion was feeding the demon. Aemon reached Keeler as corruption spread through the faithful. He could not share her belief, but he understood its importance. He told her to look with faith rather than surrender to it. Keeler saw the truth. The golden vision offered by the Lightbearers was a lie. Something diseased had wrapped itself around the Emperor's light. She seized the corruption through the same belief it had tried to consume. The possessed worshippers attacked. Aemon stood between them and Keeler. Malcador entered the battle in a storm of psychic fire. Together, Keeler's faith and the Regent's power forced Korvax into physical form. The demon became an immense worm of rot, flies, and diseased flesh. Aemon leapt into its jaws. He drove his guardian spear through its body and into its brain. Korvax exploded across the processional. But no one could answer the question it left behind. Where did faith end and corruption begin? At Lionsgate, Perturabo finally stood before Dorn. The brothers faced one another across 100 meters of blood-covered stone. Perturabo had imagined this moment for years. Dorn offered him the duel, blade against hammer. The Lord of Iron refused. To accept would reduce their contest to strength and swordsmanship. Perturabo wanted something greater. He wanted to dismantle every defense Dorn had created, to prove his superiority before killing him. Dorn looked around at the demons, cultists, and corrupted warriors that had purchased the victory. Perturabo had not defeated him through siegecraft alone. He had used lies, treachery, sorcery. Even the Lord of Iron's greatest triumph belonged partly to chaos. The accusation struck deeper than any weapon. But Lionsgate was still lost. The iron blood docked above it. The traitors raised new fortifications around the captured bridges. Titans and armies could now land beside the palace. The defenders withdrew to the next line. Perturabo declared that he would tear the Imperial palace apart, brick by brick. Dorn answered with 5 words. This is just the first wall. The siege had moved inward. The Emperor's protection was failing. Demons walked upon Terra. Faith had become both weapon and weakness. Sigismund had seen the power he would need to become the Emperor's champion. Abaddon had watched Lyak die while naming him as Chaos's future. Neither warrior had completed his transformation, but the paths were open. Keeler surrendered herself to Maltador's custody. The Regent refused to destroy the growing Imperial faith. It had nearly opened the way for corruption. It had also banished a demon. Aemon remained to watch over it. Malcador gave him a new name, Longinus. And far from the palace, beside the burning ruins of Adaba, reality opened. A lone man stepped through. He called himself Jom. He served neither Horus nor the Emperor. And he began walking toward the Imperial palace. Lionsgate had fallen. The first wall was broken. But Terra still stood. and the siege had only begun.